The future is building. UCLA got 2 commits, not one, but 2026 commits at the Rose Bowl for Saturday night.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Where we get started is this UCLA recruiting class keeps picking up, right? The big thing DeShawn Foster was hired to do was to manage the things Chip Kelly did not do well or chose flat out, blatantly refused to do. And that's where DeShawn Foster's strength or points of emphasis have been since he's been the UCLA head coach. Attack the recruiting, not just this year, but also going to the future, right? It was already detailed earlier this year how much Chip Kelly hated recruiting. They had, the fewest amount of offers or commits from high schools in the 24 class? Well, it's showing how bad this class is. That not overall, but they just have so little talent coming in. There's not a lot of depth on this UCLA team. And then UCLA starts stacking up a top recruiting class in 25, and all of a sudden, the Bruins are making some noise with DeShawn Foster in that regard. Now, beside the fact that UCLA started out 1-3, it's been frustrating to see, 1-3 with still the big end of the 3-game gauntlet to go with Penn State coming up. Yes, the optimism has turned into apathy for this 2024 season. But let's not disregard what DeShawn Foster's doing off the field. They hosted a lot of recruits at the Rose Bowl Saturday night. Yeah, it was a little rough. It was a little rough for UCLA if you're looking at an outcome, energetic Rose Bowl point of view, but you got to see what the Rose Bowl looked like with students, got to see what the student section looked like. And now what we're going to talk about is the Pula brothers who UCLA got to commit. Twin brothers. And right, when you sometimes can get one, might as well get both. UCLA gets their second and third commits for the 2026 class behind Jonas Smith, who committed back in early March when DeShawn Foster went on his own big old march to get through a bunch of recruits. That went to May, that went into, June was a big month, July, August, when the commits kept coming in. Even the portal commits keep coming in for DeShawn Foster. Kennan and Jaron Pula out of Utah, right? Provo, Utah, 6'2", 6'1" receiving threats. Kennan is actually a 4-star recruit. You've got a 3-star recruit in Jaron Pula. And right now, UCLA's got, according to the Rivals, I'm looking at Rivals right now, they had them as high as 4-star recruits. Jaron is a 3-star recruit. UCLA currently, in the way too early 2026 commit rankings, UCLA is a top 13, top 10 class. Now you can look at 24/7 Sports, you'll see different metrics, but the Bruins are already pulling in commits. And they've watched those games. All right, they've watched these games. There's different types of kids you want for your program, right? There's those who are going to like the glitz and the glamour. They're going to come and ask for a paycheck signed in their junior year, sophomore year, whatever year you're recruiting, and be like, hey, I want money right now. Or then there's other guys who are going to be like, hey, I want an atmosphere. They're going to look at SEC. They're going to look at the big house. They're going to go look at those places. And then there's people who want to be more on the West Coast, right? These are Utah kids. These are guys that you're looking to recruit, that they have to understand they're trying to be a part of a movement, and it won't happen overnight. Yes, with the portal, you can do a lot of things. But if you're recruited out of high school, and also knowing nowadays that committing to a school is not really binding, even if you send an NLI and an NIL deal, seeing the Slukas, the Jaden Rashadas, but it's good to see UCLA is going out. Now, it's interesting, the first 3 guys, you look at positional-wise, all receivers in the 26 class. A lot of receivers, right? Well, you got a lot of older guys for UCLA's receiver room. They're all going to be gone. There are quite a few freshmen in that room, but there will be a need for talent in that year. UCLA goes after that. And you're wondering, where's the offensive lineman? UCLA's been addressing the offensive lineman and the quarterback and the tight ends. and the defensive players in the 25 class. So what's the emphasis so far in the early 26? It's receivers and multiple receiving threats. Not just because you're trying to replace guys, but because you want to bulk up depth-wise for commitments in case guys change their mind. Now, UCLA, they're continuing to get some good things. I was reading what Greg Biggins had to write, a 24/7 sports writer. Athletic likes their game. They can go do things vertically. Kennan's got the higher rating. You've got Jaron. And it's interesting to get, it'd be fun to have the twin brothers. You have them probably one number apart, UCLA blue and gold. That's what I envision. So let's not get lost that, yes, UCLA is not good at this moment and may not be good in 2024, right? Like in many of the games. The next chance UCLA may have to win a game is in a couple of weeks when they play Minnesota. But don't forget, again, I'm going to reiterate that first point. What DeShawn Foster is doing is what Chip Kelly didn't. And now, obviously, it's a little bit flipped, right? UCLA got a little more out of their players on the field. That's Chip. But he wouldn't go get the guys to make them better and be a superpower or cared about NIL or anything else. And DeShawn Foster has an energy, a quiet but enthusiastic aura that I hope can permeate through the locker room through what looks to be a very unsuccessful season. But he's putting out the feelers for the future, right? That is what he wants to do. And he's assembled a recruiting team to go convince, go get the NIL together, right? It's getting together for basketball. And if we're going to sit there and not care about football, the NIL has to come from somewhere. The recruiting has to come from somewhere. That's what he's doing. He's going out and getting guys. The 25 class was flirting with the top 20, top 30, and still could have some last-minute rise potential. 26, they're already putting things out there when Chip would have barely been looking at 25, let alone even looked at a 26 high school class list, let alone visited or talked to one, right? So as much as it's all negativity, yes, it's frustrating to see what they're putting on the Rose Bowl, that they can't protect Garbers, that he's even a question to play this week at Penn State. And normally this is an episode I'd be sitting here talking, let's grade what UCLA did Saturday against Oregon. And that episode will be coming out at a later date. But I thought, hey, recruits coming out, commit. Let's put a little positivity up in there. Not one, but two commits. And a class that looks with the, nice class ranking right now. Very, very early in the 26. And yes, I'm not kidding myself. These guys could flip. They could go change their mind. And that would mean not one, but two changes. But they committed on the same day, September 30th. And that's a nice recruiting win for what expected to be and what expects to be a big recruiting news week in the UCLA fandom, right? You got a big basketball recruit coming. We got that episode. Well, Nick McCamenia, he's got his official visit. I'll talk more about that in a later episode as well. And the Bruins hosted a lot of recruits at the Rose Bowl Saturday night. And what they're doing is a lot better. It wasn't like Oregon went out, did like what Miami did to Florida and said, you come to the Nike U school, right? No. UCLA fought just being undermanned and underwhelmed. And they're still running recruiting wars because they know they want to build for the future. And I hope that continues to be the case and the message preached for DeShawn Foster. I wonder if he'll be around by that point, 2-3 years. That would be his third year at UCLA as head coach if they stick around and they're committed, and that's who is the head coach at UCLA. But so much to be determined, and it's good to do this early and get them locked in. Because the earlier you get commits, the more you get eyes saying, hey, we got a quarterback coming in the next class. I'm not entirely sure how he's going to finish out his high school career at Long Beach Poly in Madden Imeliava. But the idea is they have lots of quarterbacks, youngsters. They got Martin, who may be starting. Who knows who might start next week? There's the portal, and they're starting to make sure the western part of the United States, in their backyard in Southern California, they grapple with everybody else, and they make sure, hey, we can grab the recruits in our own backyard. Okay? That's what UCLA has been aiming to do. So big recruiting win early at the end of September. Now we're going to wrap up this episode and talk what is going on around the Big Ten. But let's talk about that, right? Big Ten football, a lot of movement, unique opportunities. What does this mean for UCLA going forward with what happened last weekend? Here on Locked On UCLA. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season big on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get into a hunch in the middle of the game, you're like, let's check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you can place your bets. all on FanDuel. So you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed, when you place your first $5 bet. Again, that's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, we're going around the Big Ten to wrap up this episode. All right, what's going on here, right? Around the Big Ten. Let's go around the Big Ten Conference, because we got to remember when you look at the standings page and you're like, what? And you see like 20 teams in a conference, it seems ludicrous. It is. It's ridiculous. But we're going to go around and talk to you about these teams in this conference with what's going on. All right. So let's go to the Friday night special, which UCLA will be a part of November 8th and 15th, Iowa and at Washington. Regardless of what you think, they get big numbers on Friday night football. I think that should be a high school football night, not a college football night. Until then, the TV makers, the money makers, they're going to choose what they want. They're going to make their money. They're going to make the revenue. It's going to be a Friday night game, which is where the Washington-Rutgers game got placed, right? So you got a Rutgers team playing their first Big Ten team of the game of the season against a new Big Ten team. I argue the validity of both being Big Ten teams, Washington and Rutgers, right? Not sure that's where Big Ten country is, out in New Jersey and out in Washington, but that's where the West to East Coast thing was, and that's where we've been created. Okay. Now, Washington led 3-0 early in this game. Rutgers with one of the best running backs in the country. I know we're talking about the Boise State running back with that. One of the best running backs in the country. The Huskies had their transfer quarterback who took over for Penix, Will Rogers, throw for over 300 yards. Jed Fish and everything. Their only loss has been to Wazoo in a big neutral site, more Washington-favored game. And then Washington goes down. They're down a score heading into the fourth, and Rutgers pulls it out 21-18. So when it comes to surprising unbeaten teams, Rutgers, heading into the weekend, it was Rutgers, Illinois, Indiana, as teams who are unbeaten in Big Ten play or unbeaten overall heading into week 5. Some of that has shifted and changed, but Rutgers pulls off a Friday night win. Maybe UCLA can get one of those weird Friday night wins against a Washington or an Iowa. At this rate, if they can't protect the quarterback and the offense can't figure it out, I'm not sure that can happen. Rutgers, I think, might be a very far-fetched idea to go beat them in New Jersey later this year. That's a very tough game to play against the Scarlet Knights, who are looking tougher and tougher to beat by moment's end, right? They're going to be that sneaky dark horse contender at the moment as one of those tough teams to beat in football, and the same thing in basketball. All right, that's one of the tough things about going to play a Rutgers. So Washington loses 21-18. Now, you had Ohio State. Apparently, Ohio State likes to forget that the first 15 minutes of football actually matters, because they're only leading 3-0 in East Lansing through the first 15 minutes of the game. Now, 24-7, they beat a one-loss Michigan State team who's coming off a last-minute loss, a close game. Ohio State ends up blowing out Michigan State despite scoring 3 points between the first and fourth quarters combined. They won 38-7 over Sparty. Okay, Michigan State, it was supposed to be a big blowout. Ohio State, yada, yada, yada. Cool, they win. Now, you got Penn State, Illinois. That was a unique matchup between a Penn State team who UCLA is playing next week. We already had a brief little mini intro to them with Zach Sako, the Locked On Nittany Lions host. He's very confident. They have a big, big line. The lines have only gotten bigger, right? It was supposed to be a big blowout for LSU. That line dipped. UCLA covered. It's supposed to be a big blowout for Oregon. The line dipped. UCLA covered. It's supposed to be an even bigger line against a Penn State team who I think is worse on offense than both LSU and Oregon. Probably much stronger on defense than both those two teams combined. But the Nittany Lions have a huge, huge, huge spread put out over the UCLA Bruins. And they're facing an Illinois team with what James Franklin wanted from his home crowd at Beaver Stadium, white out energy. Now, that was a top 10 team versus a top 20 team. Illinois, they went on the road to beat Nebraska. I think they have a strong win against Kansas this year. Even though Kansas has really struggled out the gate, that was still a strong win at the time. Luke Altmaier versus Drew Aller. I still have my thoughts about if Drew Aller is as legitimate of a quarterback as everybody's been promising him to say nationally, even though they're still probably going to have a huge, huge day against UCLA at the moment. That's what it looks like. Penn State, after a quarter of football, 7-7 with the Fighting Illini, At halftime, that game was tied 7-7. Touchdown late and a touchdown in the third, and Penn State wins 21-7. Okay, so that speaks to the validity of the defense. Maybe, mediocre offensive play. So I wonder if UCLA can keep this game like they've been doing these last couple of weeks against Penn State, against LSU, against Oregon, close and weird for longer than we expect, right? Against LSU, it was a one-score game heading into the fourth quarter. Against Oregon, UCLA was getting beat down on the verge of 35-3, and the next thing you know, a pick six, a field goal, a shutout third by the UCLA defense. They had the ball at midfield, driving down 2 scores, and the Oregon Yappers were very quiet until the fourth down stop happened at the end of the third quarter when Garbers couldn't complete a pass and was picked off. And I think that was maybe one of his last plays of the game, if not the last one he played. So maybe UCLA has some hope and some optimism. That's, of course, the broad-eyed, bushy-tailed lenses I have on at this moment. But Penn State stays unbeaten, gives the Fighting Illini their first loss. And if Illinois had won that game, all of a sudden, I think they might be in competition, definitely for a CFP spot, a top 12 spot, one of those 7 at-larges. Okay, I digress. Now another unique one, a Minnesota team who's 0-2 in the Big Ten, just like UCLA. Minnesota's got 2 wins, 3 losses, took on a Michigan team who has been blown out by Texas, expected by myself included to lose to USC, probably big, beat them. And then they had a game in the big house after a big emotional victory. Still the inability to throw the football against a Minnesota team who went to the portal, got an FCS leading quarterback. Hasn't really panned out so far. Last-minute loss. Minnesota just hasn't looked like a team that could have gone on the road to beat Michigan with their defense and running game. And all of a sudden, a 21-3 game at the half, the Golden Gophers scored 21 fourth-quarter points with an amazing catch at the end zone at the end of the game. And all of a sudden, Michigan had to hold on to a 3-point win. That was a late score. They took an onside and everything. Going to the big house is one thing. Michigan still ran the ball, controlled the majority of this game. And I think the way Michigan plays, it's a unique style. But I wonder what that game looks like for UCLA in Minnesota, right? That game will be interesting. That's the next home game for the Bruins. It's announced as a 6 p.m. kick on October 12th. Then it's on Big Ten Network. I'm not really sure, right? I'm confident in UCLA's chances in that game. Like, that's a game UCLA has a chance to be favored. I'm not thinking that'll be the case. It's one of those games where if you're looking at a betting line, you're looking at a spread, where the Bruins at home, if you get a little bit of energy, a later kick, not a weird 8 p.m. kick or an early midday, hot mid-October day as well at the Rose Bowl, should be a nice, cool sun slowly setting into the evening Rose Bowl night. I think that Minnesota game is doable. But after how they fought and scrapped against Michigan, you wonder how that might go. Michigan 27, Minnesota 24. It's unique. The Bruins don't play the Wolverines this year. But that Minnesota game, one of those 3 teams this year heading to the Rose Bowl that is bringing their largest contingents of traveling fans headed to Pasadena. And there's a lot of Oregon fans. There's quite a few Hoosier fans in the home opener. I want UCLA to shut up those Minnesota fans. I want them to. And I think that's a winnable game, but they have some fight. And that game will not be easy. And I'm thinking it might be Minnesota like -2 to open that line. Okay? We'll go over the rest of the Big Ten games and what that means for UCLA next on Locked On UCLA. You should go to Game Time, right? There's a lot of things happening. There's the postseason happening at Dodger Stadium. That'll be happening pretty soon. You've got UCLA football. They'll be hosting the Minnesota Golden Gophers. I encourage you, as one of the big, most winnable games of the year, you should go support DeShawn Foster and get that dub, encourage them recruits, show them the Rose Bowl that's not going to be invaded all the time by the Big Ten fans. And there's comedy, theater, music events that you want to go check out on Game Time, right? There's Game Time picks, filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Now, what you also can check out is the Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Check it out. Now take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, here we go. Final segment. We're continuing our Around the Big Ten look around, as we do on our first day after the week ends in college football. We'll get to our grades and UCLA thoughts for that game against Oregon. We'll do that Tuesday. And then coming up, we will talk about what it means for UCLA basketball with Kamenia officially visiting the Bruins and going on a Gonzaga trip later in the week. Okay, so that's a big thing for UCLA in this week of recruiting. Hosts a lot of football recruits and then a big basketball recruit coming in. Stay tuned for those videos. Now, to wrap up this episode, a couple of games we have not talked about. Yeah, that team across town looked terrible, gave you hope. You saw the Badgers a week after they looked horrible against Alabama. Their quarterback's out. The Badgers took advantage of early USC miscues, only to have some hurt them, and then USC pulled away, outscoring them 28-0 in the second half. The Badgers put up a fight. It makes you wonder if UCLA can muster up enough victory for the battle for the victory belt. Goodness gracious, it's been a long weekend. When you stay up that late to watch football, I don't even know how the East Coasters do it. You can see why there's an East Coast bias. The bias is just for sleep, right? It's just for sleep. Staying up is brutal, and then trying to recover, and then you got the NFL on, and then it's Monday. Oh goodness gracious. That's nuts. 8 p.m. kicks ain't for me. But 12:30 games, which I did see Wisconsin fans and a weird amount of USC fans at the UCLA game after. So someone to the Coliseum and then either drove home or on the way back were like, let's go to 2 games. Went to both the Coliseum and the Rose Bowl on a double dip there. USC ended up winning 38-21. Cool, whatever. Miller Moss put up a bunch of numbers. I still think that means it can be a competitive game at the end of November when UCLA plays SC. Not as dominant as people think they are. D'Anton Lynn did have to battle against a team that was turning the ball over a lot. All right. Then you've got the Indiana-Maryland game. All right. That was an interesting game, right? A Maryland team that's 3-2 now, 0-2 in Big Ten play. An Indiana team that has surprised a lot, right? 2 teams that are changing coaches. You had Indiana, you had UCLA. We're going to go kick somebody's butt in some stadium every week is my mantra. Mr. Quotable Kurt Signetti. And then you've got the one where UCLA fans, Big Ten fans, national media were stunned with how DeShawn Foster came out in the Big Ten media days. It's still brought up. I bring it up because people will continue to bring it up until the end of time. Indiana came out. They waxed UCLA in the home opener. Then they go and they get another strong win. And then they win their 5th straight in a row, dominant over Maryland. It was back and forth, but Indiana is putting up 42 points. Curtis Rourke, almost 360 yards, 3 tubs. And you're like wondering, so did UCLA just get the toughest schedule? They have to travel the furthest, other than like Hawaii. They had to go to LSU. They're going to have to go to Penn State, play Oregon. And arguably, I'm semi-joking, semi-not, maybe Indiana in that 4-game stretch is the toughest team UCLA is going to have to play, right? It was supposed to be Indiana, Minnesota, where those bookend potentials for victory in the middle of the, sandwich with those tough 3 games, 2 on the road, LSU, then you host Oregon, you go to Penn State this weekend. When Indiana is sitting there and just boat racing teams, just boom, steamrolling them. And they're putting up points. They're stopping teams, playing physical football. I don't know what to think, right? I was like, how are they favored at UCLA? Well, how are they not favored by more points than they were at UCLA? All right. I did not know the Hoosiers had it like that. And UCLA has got to teach them a lesson when they go to Assembly Hall later on in the year in basketball season. So Mick Cronin, I hope he's licking his chops to redeem the UCLA name during basketball season, March Madness, and hopefully raise it banner number 12. But until then, Indiana, they're turning into a football school. I remember I messaged the Locked On Hoosiers host. I think Ben Bolch was tweeting something saying Indiana could be 10-0 when they go face Ohio State later this year. That's how the hype is real. Went from Indiana, I've been told by multiple people that Indiana was the joke of Big Ten football, from roommates, from anybody associated with Big Ten football. Right now, they're not. And unfortunately, the Bruins have looked like one of those. And I don't want that to be the case anymore, but it'll be a slow build. And it's going to start with recruiting, which is what we talked about week 1 and how they're building in 25 and 26. and how DeShawn Foster can shuffle his coaching staff as needed throughout the year. At the moment, we're talking it'll still be a year. Then you got Nebraska at Purdue. The one team I think UCLA could absolutely beat down is Purdue, because Nebraska goes into Purdue. They were trailing, I think, 3-0 late in the third, and eventually pulled away 28-10. For a Nebraska team, I went on the limb during the Locked On Big Ten squad and was saying they're number 2 in the Big Ten potentially. Well, then that didn't happen. Illinois went and beat them. And then after a tough start at Purdue, you wonder if the letdown was going to happen 2 weeks in a row. Well, Raiola, 257 yards, a touchdown. That's why I think that November game, I think it's November, that early November game for UCLA at Nebraska with a true freshman quarterback and no pressure for the Bruins is a unique one for UCLA. I truly think that. I truly believe UCLA will be competitive with Nebraska in that game in November, not for reasons that will be backed up on paper, other than I think Nebraska has a young quarterback. UCLA defensively can have some surges if they get any pressure, right? They just got Sarif Say, made a nice play on a screen play and only played a couple of snaps against Oregon. Maybe Garbers can be healthy. They'll figure things out by November. That could be one of those sneak attack trap games that UCLA is the trap game later in the year for Nebraska. That is what I'm hoping for later this year if UCLA is going to get to 3 wins or 4 wins if they figure things out in the back half of the schedule. But Nebraska, 1-1 in Big Ten play. They beat Purdue, who's 1-3, 0-1. Couple of winless teams in Big Ten play. Minnesota, Purdue, UCLA at this moment. All right. I hope the Bruins can. And Purdue just fired their offensive coordinator. Now, it's a little different because he already had a year plus of experience. Don't go barking up this wrong tree that we need to fire Eric Bieniemy 4 games in. I'm all for reevaluating after the season if you're trying to compare out, Purdue to UCLA, offensive coordinators, offenses that have not panned out. But you need to wait a little bit, at least see if we can get an offensive line going, right? See if they can figure out the offense. But I do know UCLA will reevaluate. I hope they do the offensive coordinator situation. Now, I was all hyped. I think that of all the guys you could have hired, unless you had a super genius in the wing, we were all excited. Quite a few were excited. Now, the Commanders fans were in the comments saying, you'll see. All right. And we did see some people were pointing to his Colorado days. You'll see about Bieniemy. And I'm hoping that'll still prove to be wrong. But for now, I want him to do well. UCLA needs him to improve and the line play to improve and the quarterback to be healthy and for the run game to continue to develop as it has in many spurts in the second halves of games against LSU and Oregon. But let's not point to Purdue and just say, hey, we're going to fire Bieniemy now, because it's not going to happen until after the season. And he does have a 2-year deal. And maybe UCLA at this rate, they're just going to keep him for 2 years. Who knows? Who knows? What I want and what they're going to do financially and what they do optically are all different from what we can expect, right? They didn't fire Chip Kelly. They hired DeShawn Foster, and they went with the big name in Bieniemy, and we just got to sit in it and live in it right now. Frustrating. But speaking of frustrating, we will grade and give our thoughts to the UCLA-Oregon game in our next episode. And then the episode after that, let us talk about UCLA basketball recruiting, because it is a big week for Cronin's top target in the 25 class. Like, comment, download, subscribe on this channel and on the audio network part for Locked On Podcast Network and for Locked On UCLA. Thanks for your support. Get your hands up, Bruins fans. I know it's rough. You're still going to do it with me. All right. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.